All right. Well, back in the saddle. Hey, everyone. Welcome to, I keep on going back to one-on-one. But it's overtime with Coach Blu and Athletic Director Marissa.
Hello.
We are so happy to be here. Got some cool stuff going on Team Addict Athlete. We just returned from Arizona, down there in the southern area as we launched and met the new team down there in the Gila. I can never say that one.
Gila Bend.
The Gila Bend.
Arizona.
San Lucie.
We went down to open a new chapter of Addict to Athlete in the San Lucie district of the Tohono O'odham tribe.
Yeah.
Which was really, really awesome.
Very amazing. Met some great people down there. They are eager to get moving and start that healing process, and just a great experience. Then we were able to participate in Victory Recovery with Max Hall and Brock Bevels, Night to Prevail, which was a benefit to Victory Recovery and kind of featured some recovery-based entertainment. It was kind of awesome.
Yeah, talking about connection and helping people that struggle with addiction and mental health. It was a pretty amazing weekend. There was
a mentalist there, and I never knew what a mentalist was. This guy was like a wizard or something, right?
Yeah, like magician / mind reader. Like,
I don't know. I can kind of understand pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but this dude guessing people's like numbers they were guessing and things that they specifically chose to try and hide. Like, it blew me away.
Number between 1 and 10,000,
and
he got it right.
Nailed it. I'm like, man, I would not want this guy in an interrogation room with me, right? Yeah. So it was a good time. I got to spread the word about Addict Athlete. Met I guess like a social media follower. It was quite the experience being able to bump into someone that was familiar with Addict to Athlete. And in the hustle and bustle of the situation where everyone's come up and talking to you after the event, I didn't spend too much time with them. And then as luck would have it, or I guess as planets unite and higher powers are at work, we bumped into him and his mother at a restaurant just, about a half hour after the event and got to share some one-on-one time. And that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was awesome. He had lived here in Utah and found us, and now is back in Arizona. And it was awesome for him to say how much we've helped him and you've inspired him in his recovery journey. And
humbling.
It was pretty neat.
Super humbling. But you know what, guys? Today we got some great stuff going on before we jump into today's question. And I need to put this out there, and I'll probably say it again before we get rolling. Today's question is going to be of a highly sensitive nature, meaning we're going to be talking about domestic violence and spousal abuse. And so we got some numbers here to contact if you find yourself in a situation such as this. But I want to let you guys know that today's going to be a little bit more sensitive as we dive into some of the signs, situations, and things that revolve around this topic. Before we do that, though, I want to give a shout out and thanks to all of our Patreon subscribers. It's because of them this podcast is even possible. And so let's dive into all these champions of the Patreon group and give them the love they deserve.
All right. We want to start and thank our super fans, Karen Hardy, who I think just checked in is watching, Steve Riggs, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Chris Williams, Sensei KP Brown, Patrick Forsyth, Christy Case, Kel Lim, Faith Davis, Andrew Baird, and our new one, Dustin Weaver, who is watching from Texas.
Shout out to all you beautiful Patreon subscribers. Thank you. Who else?
Thank you, super fans. And then our rookies, Earl Dyer, Brad Waldron, and Sione and Mary Inuk. I want to thank our rookies and our pro, Justin Robbins, Gary Thurston, Flo Grant, and our champion level, Shad and Freya Robinson.
Thank you all so much. If you want bonus content specifically catered to you, the Patreon listener, jump on patreon.com/addictathlete. Sign up for a tier that works for you. As little as $2 a month can give you all the bonus material. So that alone is worth it.
It's pretty amazing.
Awesome.
Quite a bit of content there. So
yeah. Absolutely. And as things continue to arise, we hope that you'll continue to watch our website, addicttoathlete.org, all of our backlog podcasts, information about recovery, tools, and tips. All right, let's dive into this, Marissa. It's a sensitive topic. Today we're going to be talking about spousal abuse, domestic violence, if you will. It's a heavy question. And one that I think when we were kind of going over topics and questions to poll, this one stood out to me. It's probably going to take a majority of the time. But this listener, they asked the question, what sign should I be looking for if I believe there is spousal abuse happening to a member of my family? So if you could picture this, it's probably a situation by which a mother or father-in-law is watching the children, adult children who have relationships, and just noticing some signs and maybe wondering if intervention is necessary or even constituted. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, the sad thing about domestic violence and partner and spousal abuse is that it's a lot more common than you think. Yeah. And it can start off like very subtle. We're going to get into some of the ways that this stuff starts to ebb and flow. But common signs right out the gate are, things that could include physical injuries without adequate explanation, meaning like, oh, you've got like a little cut under your eye, or I'm noticing you've got bruising all over you. Things that like,
I fell down the stairs.
Yeah, the classic, right? Oh, I'm just cleaning and bumped into this or that.
I'm clumsy. And
Things that I've kind of noticed are like withdrawing from social activities and family activities. And so maybe there was some consistency with, coming over every Sunday for dinner or something, or at least checking in. But then there's this, for no reason, this withdrawal.
Excuses and can't make it to lots of things.
Maybe
texting and calling, but some withdrawal from some of the in-person social events, family events.
Yeah. Another indicator is watching when they're with one another, meaning like, is there anxiety that this individual kind of gets put under when they're close to their spouse? And you can see this just kind of by trying to downplay situations, meaning like when you're in a conversation and maybe there's some constant interrupting, that instead of saying, I can answer that question, they're talking to me, they just kind of sit silent and don't really take the lead. Yeah. And so that anxiety can come through in a lot of different ways, maybe making excuses for why that partner's not there, or maybe over-attentive on the kids to make sure they're quiet so that a partner doesn't get upset. Low self-esteem, like you can see like maybe a change in their character, their personality, meaning like maybe their physical appearance has changed dramatically.
Yeah, maybe used to be a lot more of a go-getter and maybe a little more engaged, and now more withdrawn or shy, quiet, anything like that, any big change.
And the best indicator is to put eyes on the partner themselves, to watch for controlling or jealous behaviors. Typically what we see is like this extreme dominance over the partner's social life, their online presence, their
controlling stuff,
financial dependence, and things of that nature. The thing that's crazy about that is, although you can look at the situation and be like, there is changes, there's some bruising, there's some anxiety, there's some physical appearance changes, there's things that I can kind of tell.
Yeah.
But when you watch the partner themselves, you can kind of get a feel or a vibe for that. I work with many individuals who have this happen, Marissa, right out the gate, where there's this bizarre kind of dominance over how much time they can spend outside of the home/relationship, meaning with friends or family.
Yeah.
And watching where they are and all kind of things. And those are the biggest red flags in a relationship if they're dominating finances, social contact, and time spent doing whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Their inability to be able to, go and do things that they used to be able to do. And that obviously they'd make excuses for it. Oh, I'm just busy. But as a common thing, that it's just slowly getting less and less. But like you said, that's some of the difficulty in seeing this, is a lot of times, mostly if you're close to the person, it comes on so slowly. Sometimes we can miss some of the signs because it's happened slowly. It doesn't happen overnight. And you just think, oh yeah, they are busy. And yeah, they're just don't come around as much. But really watching maybe some of the more subtle cues and nonverbals within their body language, their, eye contact, things like that, you can probably read a little bit more.
Now, typically what we see when we start looking into domestic violence and spousal abuse, we start looking at like the emotional awareness of the individual that's being demised. And what I mean by that is your history plays a huge role in this. If you come from a background by which you have physical, verbal, sexual abuse in your past, the chances of you being exposed to that again in a relationship are quite high.
Yeah.
And you know why that is, right?
No.
Well, the thing that's interesting about this is, and again, we gravitate towards what's familiar. Yeah. And so even though, and it sounds kind of creepy, even though we want to change our trajectory in our lives, chances are if you have those as background issues, you may underestimate your level of I guess, emotional choice and investment, because chances are you'll pick up on some subtleties of things that you appreciated with a parent or whatnot. Or, if you could grow up in broken homes, maybe that absentee father, and we kind of project that onto, a future spouse. What happens is we'll kind of look past some of those small indicators because you already know how to deal with them. And so you're like, well, those are small, and so it will never reach this. But guess what? Eventually, it reaches that point.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is when you break the cycle completely, you have to empower your children and you have to allow them to tell authority no. And we've discussed this many times about the way that Marissa and I parented and raised our kids to where they felt comfortable challenging me, meaning as their father, if I wanted them to do something or needed their help with something, and legitimately they said no because they were doing something that required their attention or whatever the reason. There were many times I would allow that to happen so that when I asked for it again, okay, well, it's been an hour now. Can you come do this now? Well, yeah. The reason why was because I needed them to build up the courage to kind of confront us, me specifically. Because if my daughters could draw the line and say, Dad, no, then I said this in the past, right? The idiot down the street who tries to get handsy with them is never going to cross that line because they're going to know that, like, I don't need to take this. I can draw this line here.
Helping build some of their independence and
Yeah, so much so that, when our daughter was, 12, she utilized those skills to get out of a very scary situation that, could have ended up in some pretty heavy tragedy, I would say.
Yeah.
And so if you want to know that story, go back and listen to Savannah's minor league podcast a few years ago. But the interesting thing about this too, Marissa, is it's hard to see because there's a lot of different forms of abuse, right? Yeah. It's important, listeners, to take note that abuse can take so many different forms, including the emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, even in relationships with when you think, well, married and consensual, there is still aspects of sexual abuse that could happen in a relationship.
All the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is trying to pinpoint a little bit about what's going on, but the indicators kind of are the same, meaning like you'll still see the anxiety and the physical appearance changes and the withdrawal. You'll still see those things. Yeah. But one of the things that's most obvious is when there's physical abuse, because typically there's obviously marks that remain, right? And physical abuse is an inherent infliction of bodily harm on another person that could result in physical pain or impairment.
Yeah.
And you think of a list of physical aggression: striking, hitting, pushing, shoving, shaking, slapping, poking, pinching, kicking, burning. I mean, anything that can cause pain or impairment falls under physical abuse.
Absolutely.
And so we typically see this. And the interesting thing is like, well, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Is it the emotional abuse we're going to talk about? Is it the physical abuse? There's really no rhyme to reason on this, but there's sometimes when all of a sudden there's this major outburst of anger. And most people in a situation like that allow their anger to kind of like do that fight or flight response. And when it's an aggressor, it's always fight. What I see most often with this, Marissa, is someone throwing something at their spouse.
Yeah.
They pick up a book or a cup or whatever, and not intending to hit the person, but sometimes your aim's a little on point and bam, right?
And sometimes intending and then trying to pretend or excuse it as, oh, I didn't mean that. I was just mad and throwing it.
Absolutely.
To hit you.
We see that with adults to children as well, right? Like throwing a toy at them or pick this up and whatnot. And that can be extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
But you and I, it was kind of an interesting conversation we were having. We were listening to something on podcast, and it talked about a domestic violence situation that ended up with the strangling of a partner.
Yeah.
And you had remembered that there is significant data on that attribute alone, the act of putting your hands around your wife, your partner's throat region, that is quite shocking. And if you have that, I'd like you to share it because I didn't know this, but it makes perfect sense because that is an absolute crossing of a emotional, physical boundary.
So there's a lot of different types of physical abuse, but I would personally say the most dangerous one is choking and strangulation. It says if a woman's partner has ever strangled her even once, her risk of being murdered by that same partner with a gun shoots up 750%.
That is skyrocket.
750% compared to a woman who's never been strangled. When it comes to abuse, be it physical, mental, financial, it's all horrible. It's unjustified. But strangulation is the single greatest predictor of homicide in abusive relationships. A partner who strangles is likely to kill you, and soon. They say that 750 increase isn't just an increase in death in your lifetime, it's a 750 increase that they will kill you within the next year.
Yeah.
So not only the danger of them killing you at some point, but it increases dramatically on how soon, because usually the abuser escalates. It doesn't usually just stay at this, slapping, bumping, throwing something.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to increase and escalate. Another one here says 45% of attempted homicides in domestic violence situations against women involved non-fatal strangulation. 70% of women who've been strangled believed that they were going to die, and 38% reported losing consciousness. Yeah, it's escalating, extreme, horrific danger.
And as you were reading this, and there have been, I do marriage and family therapy, relationship therapy, counseling. Many times there's been situations by which even just for a moment, out of pure anger or frustration, that has happened.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I don't think, obviously, putting your hands on your spouse, your partner, in and of itself is a big issue. Now, the thing about this, too, that's hard to kind of wrap your head around is the way that some of this starts. But before we do that, I also got to say, one of the hardest ones to see is emotional abuse.
Yeah.
And emotional abuse can be a lot more complex than physical abuse because it takes a lot of different forms in and of itself, right? It could be isolation, like you don't get any money, you're not driving the car, you're staying here, whatever. Jealousy, possessiveness, verbal tirades where they belittle their partner, verbal threats of harm, verbal threats against themselves. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself, those kind of things.
It can also just be using guilt and shame to hold somebody hostage and feeling bad about themselves, feeling awful that they're ruining someone else's life when every individual has control of their own self. You did nothing to force anyone to do anything. But that guilt and they use it quite dangerously.
Yeah.
Which then turns into often gaslighting.
Exactly. And those kind of come in forms of threats of divorce or abandonment, threats of cheating or having affairs. And what typically happens in a situation like this, the aggressor will start using children as leverage. Like, well, if we're divorcing, you're not getting the kids.
Yeah.
How dare any of you do that? That is absolutely horrific.
I have the money. I'll get the lawyers. You won't be able to afford it.
You don't know how many individuals, Marissa, fall for that too, where they kind of feel trapped because if they leave, then there's a fear that they won't retain their children.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that's not true. When you start rallying yourself around people that care and can see this and can testify and help, counselors, therapists, clergy, you're going to be a lot better off than trying to do this alone.
Document everything.
Which kind of sucks, but it's necessary. So the way all this kind of approaches, and you've heard my 3 stages of love, right? Falling in love, falling out of love, and learning to love and be loved.
Yeah.
The stages of abuse kind of follow to a certain degree. The first 2 stages of this. There's that initial honeymoon experience, the honeymoon stage, right?
Yeah.
And how would you describe the honeymoon stage of a relationship and even maybe into the first year or 2 of marriage? What does a honeymoon stage look like, do you think, in a relationship? I mean, we saw it with youth we worked with. We see it with relationships.
Everything's wonderful and exciting, and they're charming and sweet. There's usually often on the ladder of the abuse side, there's what they call love bombing, where they give so much love, so much, the dates are extravagant, the gifts are outrageous, and they're so intense, and that you just think, oh, this is wonderful, but take an assessment of that's above and beyond. That's some love bombing, and that's to highly distract you from what will come after.
Yeah, they literally throw on the charm and the endearing kind of attention early on in the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And we say that because masks are usually on when you're in a relationship, right? I mean, we don't take our masks fully off until we for sure know that we're moving into a deeper kind of connection. And so there's the whole attitude of putting them on a pedestal and thinking that they're just the best.
Yeah.
If it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? Meaning that we all have problems. We all have some struggles there. So the authenticity of it can get caught up in maybe a desire to want to leave a situation or just infatuated by having a relationship.
Yeah.
But the honeymoon stage is rough because the abusive individual doesn't come across that way. So when it begins, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, like, what is this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So some of the abuse cycle is, it will start out on there's tension building.
That's the stage after honeymoon.
Yeah. The abuser's going to create some tension. The survivor's going to have stress being built, and it just slowly builds. And then the second one is the incident. The abuser lashes out, physical, verbal, psychological, sexual tactics to dominate. Number 3 is then kind of back to like a honeymoon. It's the reconciliation. The abuser makes excuses, attempts to apologize. There's some gaslighting. Oh, nothing really happened. It wasn't that bad, kind of calming down. And then it goes, I guess, more of the honeymoon, the calm. Things are peaceful. There's flowers being brought. There's some more love bombing of I'll never do it again. There's promises that won't ever be kept. But often this doesn't last long until back up to tension builds, incident, reconciliation.
Yeah. So the honeymoon stage and the tension building stage, the abuser, the partner, gives some verbal warnings, and their body language, it might change. Their vestments kind of start to intensify, and you can start feeling it. Now, and the crazy thing about this is when you have children, they can feel it too. I mean, most of you have probably been aware enough to walk into a room after there's been a heavy discussion or the mood has significantly dropped into something that's not super pleasant. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget this, Marissa. We were doing group one day years ago, and there was an individual who was just really on the hot seat, and behaviors were messed up, and the group was giving them some very heavy advice, and it was intense. And then one of the clients come walking in, and she's typically this bubbly kind of like happy-go-lucky person.
Yeah.
So she bopped right in there with her big smile, and immediately she could tell. And I watched her whole physical appearance, her facial expressions kind of drop and kind of like sneak over to a chair.
Yeah.
And I asked her about that afterwards. I'm like, how did you know? Because usually you swing in here and you're like, hey, everybody.
Yeah.
But she's like, I could feel it.
Yeah.
That's an interesting experience. Most of you have this. You probably don't realize it, but you can tell. And so kids can too. They're like little barometers.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm. And so, when we get in situations where I hear people say that, their parents never argued or fought in front of them and they grew up in this perfect home, I beg to differ, because you have to see that kind of stuff. You have to see the buildup, the argument, and then the most crucial part, reconciliation. Yeah, the conflict resolution. That's the most important part. If you never see any of that stuff, well, then you're going to think that that's just the way that it is, and it's absolutely
People
not.
Fight, and then all of a sudden it's better. They fight, and it's better, but it's so good for kids to see that conflict resolution.
Yeah. So then you move into the actual violent stage, right? Those incidences of abuse. And in your cycle you were just talking about, eventually that tension is going to boil over, and the abusive spouse is going to engage in abusive behavior, and it's going to happen heavily.
Yeah.
And immediate help needs to take place. And again, we're going to talk about this in a moment about reaching out for the national hotline and or coming in to talk to a therapist, counselor, or dare we even say law enforcement if needs be.
Yeah.
We've heard too many stories by which individuals have waited too long to report these kind of behaviors, with the result being, tragic.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you hear this a lot. And it's hard because there's real emotions and love that are at play here.
Yeah.
And, I remember watching Cops as a little kid, Channel 13, I think that's still on, I don't even know. But you'd see these situations with domestic violence, and the cop would say, would you like to press charges? And the answer is typically always
no.
Yeah.
Or yes, and then all of a sudden they sleep on it, and they're back to bail them out of jail.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that happens?
I think oftentimes it's because they think this is the only person that loves me, and seeking that outside validation, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. Another one is thinking this is all I can get. This is the only kind of attention or love I can get, and this is all I deserve. So usually it's often from past experiences. This doesn't usually happen overnight, whether it's this same partner that's slowly been doing this over years and years and years, or it's something from even previous relationships or parent-child relationships that you had growing up where your self-esteem has been compromised and your belief in yourself and understanding of even your own personal power is withheld.
Absolutely. And the hard part about that is where you're going with it, right? Let's say that you decide you're going to press charges. And, the longest they're going to be in jail for something like that until they have a bond or before they go to the front of the judge is only so long.
Yeah.
And then where are they going when they get out?
Yeah.
Back to you. And if you've been in a situation by which you've been limited with your finances, your ability to contact outsiders, your family, where are you going with the kids, right?
Knowing what to do and where to go. Like even the concept of, his name is on the lease. Well, then he gets out and he's able to come back because it's his place. But there's other ways that it can be worked around. If you apply and get a restraining order, then he's got to find a different place. And being able to utilize, there's a lot more resources now online or in person to be able to assess and find out what resources do you have to be able to get along. Say, the spouse is the only income, and how do you get by for yourself and or kids if you're not working and having an income?
Yeah. There's typically a degree of learned helplessness when this happens because you've been so suppressed that anytime you've tried to reach out, you've been emotionally, physically beaten, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so now it's like this darned if you do, darned if you don't situation. So this is why you really want to start developing a team, right? Like some support behind you. Now, what happens until the end is experienced is that reconciliation stage, the thing that you said. And I like that because this typically happens pretty close, if not immediately after the abuse has been experienced. And that's kind of where all that built up tension has been released. And then the abuser wants to try and sugarcoat and calm down.
Apologize or pretend it didn't happen, ignore the issue. But yeah, the peak is calmed.
Absolutely. What I see that's really sad sometimes is that this is typically when it happens repetitively. The victim of the abuse tries to get there as fast as possible. So when they start seeing the wind up and the spiral, they just lean right into it so that they can get to that reconciliation stage faster.
Yeah. Because
that's heartbreaking.
The reconciliation and the calm, the apologies, the love bombing is so much better. So we know this is going to happen. Lean into that abuse and wait for the sunshine on the other side. But like I say, this is going to escalate. It always does. It cannot stay the way it does. It's,
The abusive spouse will often use this time to try and offer a form of affection and attempt to kind of move past the abusive episode and make light of it and gaslight and try to pretend that it wasn't as bad. And like you said, I love that, the love bombing, that's the gift giving, right? Yeah. Those acts of service. And so when the abusive spouse pours on the affection in that reconciliation stage, it can stir some emotions of affection to be returned because at least they're not angry at you anymore.
Yeah.
That is a scary cycle, and it continues to repeat itself until you make the conscious decision to be done with it.
Yeah.
And
is it going to be easy? No, absolutely not. But there's resources and there's things out there. I think every city has, shelters that protect you. There's one here that they even keep most of them, they keep the location anonymous.
Yeah.
No one knows where it is. There's people now that a lot of resources that work through the police and the law enforcement to be able to help and be able to offer resources and help. So,
and if you're in a situation, gentlemen or women, whoever's, the abuser, the aggressor, it's time for you to take a look in the mirror and get you some help too. Mm-hmm. That way you're channeling anger is not appropriate and needs to be dealt with so that you can learn how to, channel it to, growth and emotional stability rather than violence and aggression.
And to be able to address what is the issue behind all of that anger and rage.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you don't have if the spouse leaves, that anger and rage will still go somewhere. Does it then turn to children's, coworkers, another driver on the road, and we have road rage incidents? Does it, turning to substances to try to numb it and dull that anger and rage? that has to be addressed.
Part of what we were listening to on the podcast talked about some infamous serial killers, and Ed Kemper. What a scary situation. This guy was 6'9",
6'9" and like 350
I mean,
pounds.
just a monster of a man who killed many women. And towards the end, his mother, which was where all of his anger was directed to. And when he ended the life of his mother, that's when he kind of like turned himself in. He's like, okay, well, guess I don't have anything to be mad at anymore.
Yeah.
Imagine what you could have done if you could have released that a different way and been able to have someone understand you, to the lives that could have been saved. So guys, you have to do your part as well. There's a reason why that anger is being channeled that way. More than likely, you've seen that or experienced it yourself as a child. I myself have experienced physical abuse from stepfathers. I have scars on my body because of that. Yet it's never crossed my mind to do that to Marissa or my children because I dealt with it. I'm like, I'm not going to carry this anymore. Yeah. The sad part about this is watching my mother and my sisters go through this. I watched this happen frequently.
Time and time again.
A lot of emotional abuse, a lot of physical abuse, and it rendered some learned helplessness to, I would say, my mother and to my siblings, to the point where they kind of allowed it. And even my mother, through her adult life, even after we all left, still allowed herself to be put in situations by which there was a locus of control and dominance. And it's a sad thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very sad thing. And so this isn't something that's just going to heal itself. If it's happened once, it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
There should be zero tolerance for physical, emotional, spiritual abuse in a relationship by which both of you had at one time fallen in love and wanted to have a future together.
Yeah.
The likelihood of it being a one-time situation is very rare.
Very rare. And it's an awful situation for, the abuser. I'm sure in most cases have been through horrific things themselves. Does it excuse it? No. Do most men who are physically abused grow up to be abusers or even murderers? No, it's a small percentage, but it doesn't matter. Somebody has core issues there. Both have core issues there that need to be addressed, and to be able to even stand up for yourself and seek some help, seek solace, seek an escape is so extremely courageous and should absolutely be celebrated. And I hope if anyone's out there, they can contact us, contact the
National Domestic Hotline, which is 1-800-799-7233.
Yeah.
1-800-799-7233.
Yeah. Seek out help. Find, friends, family, anyone around you that can be supportive.
And when you intermix substance abuse and addictions into this melting pot in and of itself, you are flirting with absolute fire. And typically what we see is when there are attempts to control substance abuse or addiction, or if there's an outside influence, the law enforcement, judicial, this is where tensions start running really high. So although there's interventions, this is also a scary period of time as well.
And can increase the danger if you're looking at, which is understandable.
Now, the thing that I've kind of come to understand, things I've learned throughout my experience as a counselor therapist, is that for every week of good behavior, let's say they get recovered, there's no abuse, there's no aggression, for every week that you suffered that, it's going to take one solid month of positive behavior before you'll start feeling as though there can be absolute trust reestablished in that relationship. So you think about this, Marissa. If the first 3 years of your married life, your relationship was abusive, that's almost 150 weeks, if not more, maybe 170 weeks.
Yeah.
That's going to be 170 months, which is going to take lifetimes to reestablish. And so you have to be able to accept that individuals, men, women who abuse your spouse or partner, if that relationship's going to succeed, you have to understand, but for the rest of your life, there will always be that thought in the back of your partner or spouse's mind that if she pushes or he pushes things a little too far, that could still be a result. And so,
and is that something you're open and willing as you see change and growth, that, okay, well, 1 month, 1 week, that's fantastic. But are you okay with 3 years of abuse to look at 13 years of healing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a long time. And do you want to invest in that much time to wait and see how they do?
Right.
Like, maybe it's not worth it to you, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, listener, I hope that answers your question. I cannot stress enough that there should be intervention deployed as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Even if there's a thought or a concern or a worry, it's time to get more eyes on the situation. And the sad thing is about it, you've got to empower the person receiving the abuse, because they won't do it on their own if they don't know they have the support.
But you also can't force them either.
That's the sad truth.
That's really difficult, but pulling them aside, letting them know that you love them, you want to help wherever you can, and when they're ready, if they just even need somebody to talk to, that you're there,
Mm-hmm.
That's got to happen.
Yeah. Again, if you find yourself in that situation, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233.
Yeah.
If you feel the ramp up happening in your own relationships, reach out. Coach Blu is a licensed mental health therapist and substance use disorder counselor. I'd love to get you some help if you need it.
Yeah.
You do not have to tolerate being treated poorly or being abused. It just doesn't need to be part of your experience here in the life that you're leading.
No, not at all.
And remember, it doesn't have to be men v. women.
Yeah.
It could be women doing the same things to men and to children. I mean, so think about it, right? I mean, we always kind of think of the sweaty, oily, husband coming down and beating up the wife, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be so many other avenues and outlets.
Same-sex marriages, partnerships. It can be boyfriend, girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Our daughter had a very close neighbor and friend who was killed by her boyfriend. Teenagers.
Yeah.
So it can start young, and there are lots of things that need to be taught to younger generations, not only adults, to be able to help.
Absolutely. So if you have a loved one that's struggling, make sure you give them the love and support they need. Be there ready to receive, and help build that home team to provide some outlet that would definitely be considered a gift of life. So,
yeah.
Anything else you have on your agenda?
I'm just going to post a great resource that I've found over the years called One Love Foundation.
Oh yeah.
It's great information on healthy boundaries with relationships. It can be peer, friend, coworker, how to set boundaries, what is unhealthy, what is toxic, and it's awesome.
Great. Well, thank you for doing that. Listeners, thank you so much for being here today. Get your questions. Keep coming in. Remember, if we don't read them on air, we will definitely respond to them direct messaging. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question, comment, thoughts, concerns. We'd love to hear from you. Jump on, review the podcast.
Yeah.
Give us a rating. Helps get the podcast out there further. Keep an eye on the website, addicttoathlete.org. And as always, continue to do your best to turn your mess of all of this stuff into your very powerful message.